It started with a notebook, a small, worn-out journal with a cracked spine and pages filled with sketches of kitchens, notes about mortgage rates, and clippings from home magazines. Every evening after work, when exhaustion tugged at her, she'd open that notebook and remind herself why she was pushing so hard. The dream was simple, a home of her own. Not a mansion, not anything extravagant, just a space that was hers, built from years of sacrifice, patience, and unshakable determination. For 7 years, she worked toward that goal. She took on double shifts at her office, freelanced on weekends, and rarely spent on herself. While her coworkers talked about vacations, she'd quietly pack homemade lunches to save a few more dollars. While her siblings bought new cars or designer clothes, she fixed her old second-hand hatchback and told herself, just a few more years. Every decision was calculated. Every sacrifice had a purpose. It wasn't an easy road. There were nights she'd come home to her cramped apartment and wonder if it was all worth it. The peeling paint, the flickering light, the paper-thin walls that let in every sound, it was enough to test anyone's patience. Sometimes her parents would call and say, "You're overworking yourself. Why not just stay with us until you find someone to settle down with?" Her brother laughed when she mentioned saving for a house, saying, "Why buy when you can just rent? You're too serious about everything." But she kept her head down and kept saving. She didn't want to depend on anyone, not her parents, not a husband, not luck. She still remembered the day she first saw the house. It wasn't perfect. The lawn was overgrown, the paint was chipped, and the kitchen cabinets were old. But it had something the others didn't: light. Warm, golden light that poured through the windows in the late afternoon, hitting the wooden floor in long, soft beams. It felt alive. She walked through the empty rooms, imagining where she'd place her bookshelves, how she'd arrange the dining table, where she'd hang the curtains she'd been saving. For a moment she saw her future there, not the version others expected of her, but the one she'd built with her own 2 hands. When she finally signed the papers, her hands trembled. The realtor congratulated her, but she barely heard the words. She stood on the porch, keys in hand, and felt an ache rise in her throat. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that every lonely night, every skipped outing, every hour of overtime had meant something. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The first few weeks were a blur of work and wonder. She painted the walls herself, choosing soft cream and pale green tones that made the rooms glow with warmth. She replaced the broken tiles in the kitchen, even though it meant spending nights crouched on the floor with aching knees and dust in her hair. But she loved every second of it. The more she fixed, the more the house began to feel alive, her laughter echoing off the walls, her footsteps giving rhythm to the quiet. Her parents still called occasionally, asking, "Are you sure you can manage all that alone?" She'd smile and say yes, not mentioning how proud she felt when she unlocked her own door every morning. The house wasn't just her dream anymore, it was her independence. Her quiet rebellion against the expectations that had always tried to box her in, standing in her finished living room one evening, the last bit of sunset glowing through the curtains. She felt something she hadn't in years: peace. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. She'd built something beautiful out of her solitude, a home that carried her story in every nail, every brushstroke, every carefully chosen detail. And soon, she thought with a hopeful smile, she'd finally invite her family to see it. The house smelled faintly of new paint and fresh flowers. The morning she decided to invite her family. Sunlight streamed through the wide living room windows, warming the oak floor she'd polished the night before. It felt alive now, no longer an empty shell, but a place with heartbeat and memory. Each room had her touch: the delicate lace curtains in the kitchen, the soft rug by the fireplace, the small vase of lilac on the dining table. Every detail whispered one thing: home. She stood in the middle of it all, holding her phone, scrolling through her family group chat. The last few messages were routine updates about her sister's pregnancy, her brother's new job, a few jokes from her mother. No one had really asked how she was doing. But she didn't dwell on that. This wasn't about old hurts. This was about sharing something she'd built from scratch. She typed carefully. wanting the tone to sound light, not desperate. "Hey, everyone. I'd love to have you all over this Saturday evening for a housewarming dinner. It would mean so much to me if you came. I've finally settled in and can't wait to show you the place." She reread it 3 times before hitting send. Within minutes, the message was marked "Seen." Her brother replied first with a thumbs-up emoji. Her mother wrote, "We'll see, dear. Depends how your father feels that day." Her sister simply sent a heart, followed by, "Sounds nice." It wasn't the enthusiastic response she'd hoped for, but she smiled anyway. They'd come, of course they would. This was a big moment, and surely they'd be proud. The next few days were a flurry of excitement. She planned everything down to the smallest detail, not out of vanity, but because she wanted her family to feel special. She cooked all their favorites: her father's love for roast chicken with garlic butter, her mother's obsession with apple pie, and her sister's fondness for creamy mashed potatoes. She even bought a new tablecloth, soft ivory linen with embroidered edges, and set the table with the china she'd been saving for when the time feels right. This was that time. In between the preparations, she found herself remembering old family dinners. The laughter, the teasing, her father's stories that always went on too long. Back then, she'd sit quietly, half listening, half dreaming about the life she wanted, the one she was finally living now. Maybe this dinner could bring some of that warmth back. Maybe it could be a new beginning. On Saturday morning, she woke early to bake. The scent of cinnamon filled the air as she carefully laid out the silverware, polished until it gleamed. She placed a framed photo of the family, taken years ago at a picnic, in the center of the living room. Everyone was smiling in that picture, and she liked to imagine they still could. If only they tried. As the clock ticked toward evening, she showered, dressed in her soft blue dress, and took one last walk around the house. Everything looked perfect, the candles waiting to be lit, the wine chilling, the soft music humming from the kitchen speaker. She paused by the door, heart light with anticipation. For the first time in years, she felt connected again, like all the distance and silence between her and her family might finally melt away over dinner. When she checked her phone, the messages were still quiet, but she brushed it off. They're probably on their way, she told herself. The night was just beginning, and soon the house that had been hers alone would finally echo with familiar voices once more. The evening sun sank behind the trees, scattering soft amber light across the porch. Inside, the house glowed warmly, candles flickering, music humming softly, and the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air. Everything was ready. The table stood set for 6, each plate perfectly aligned, napkins folded neatly beside shining cutlery. She'd even added small touches, a sprig of rosemary on each plate, the kind of detail her mother always admired. She checked her reflection one last time in the hallway mirror. The blue dress suited her. It brought out the warmth in her eyes. She'd tied her hair back the way her mother liked it. Everything about this evening was meant to say, "I'm doing well. I'm happy. I wanted to share this with you." At 6 o'clock sharp, she lit the candles and turned down the lights. The house transformed, soft and golden, like a photograph come to life. She poured herself a small glass of wine, the first sip light and hopeful. Then she waited and waited. By 6:30, she started pacing gently between the living room and the porch, glancing at the driveway every few minutes. The sky turned from orange to violet, and still there was no sign of headlights. She checked her phone, no new messages. She typed a quick one herself, light and casual. "Just checking if you're on the way. Dinner's ready." A few minutes later, her brother's scene mark appeared, but no reply. Her stomach fluttered uneasily. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe they'd stopped to pick up something for dessert. She told herself not to worry, but the warmth in her chest was beginning to fade. At 7:30, she reheated the chicken. She stirred the mashed potatoes again, trying to keep them fluffy, and rearranged the salad just to stay busy. The music began to feel too cheerful, so she turned it off. The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing against the walls. Outside, the street was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a car passed, but not toward her house. She sat down at the dining table, her hands folded in her lap, eyes on the empty chairs. The candles had burned halfway down, their wax dripping slowly like the minutes she'd been waiting. She opened her phone again. Nothing, no messages, no missed calls. She scrolled through their chat, her invitation, her hopeful reminder, her cheerful note earlier that day. Can't wait to see you tonight. All unanswered. By 8, the food had gone cold. She tried to eat a little, but each bite felt heavy. The silence grew unbearable. She walked to the window and looked out at the street again, her heart sinking with every second that passed. There was still no car, no laughter, no familiar voices approaching, only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. Finally, she sat back down, her shoulders slumping. The dining table, once beautiful, now looked almost tragic, like a stage waiting for actors who would never appear. Her eyes stung as she watched the candlelight flicker across the empty plates. She'd imagined her parents sitting there, admiring her home, her siblings teasing her for being too neat. She'd imagined laughter filling these walls. Instead, all she had was silence and the faint ticking of the clock. By 9, she blew out the candles one by one. The house dimmed until only the kitchen light remained. She packed the food into containers, wiped the spotless table, and whispered to herself, "Maybe something came up." But she knew better. Somewhere deep down, the truth settled in quietly. They hadn't forgotten. They'd just chosen not to come. She leaned against the counter, eyes on the dark window, her reflection faint and lonely. The home she'd dreamed of for 7 years suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too full of unanswered hope. And though she didn't cry, the ache inside her was deeper than tears, the kind of ache that comes from realizing you'd never really belonged where you kept trying to fit. And the morning after the dinner that never was felt strangely still. The house, so full of warmth and anticipation the night before, now carried a cold, hollow quiet. The dishes were washed and put away, the candles stood half-burned on the table, and the faint scent of rosemary still lingered in the air, a ghost of what could have been. She sat at the kitchen counter, cradling a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring blankly at her phone. No messages. Not even a call to explain. She scrolled through her family chat again, her eyes tracing over her last unread message. "Dinner's ready. Can't wait to see you all." The timestamp glared at her, a reminder that hours had passed and no one had answered. She thought about calling her mother, but something stopped her. Pride, maybe, or exhaustion. She didn't want to beg for explanations. It wasn't until late morning that she opened social media, half out of distraction. That's when she saw it. A post from her sister, bright and cheerful, tagged with their parents and brother. The caption read, "The most wonderful baby shower ever. Thank you, everyone, for making today so special." Her breath caught. She scrolled through the pictures, each one hitting harder than the last. There was her mother laughing beside a table full of pink decorations and cupcakes. Her father grinning proudly. Her brother, his arm around their sister. They all looked happy, glowing, united. The timestamp said it all. The event had taken place last night. The same night she'd sat alone at her dining table, waiting for them to arrive. At first, she just stared at the screen, numb. Then the confusion came, the disbelief. Maybe they didn't realize the times clashed? She thought weakly. Maybe they planned to come afterward. But the truth was undeniable. They'd known. The group chat proved it. Her sister had said, "Sounds nice?" Days ago. Her mother had said, "We'll see." They'd all known, and no one had told her. The realization sank in like cold water. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't bad timing. It was a choice. They hadn't seen her dinner as important enough. She set her phone down slowly, her hands trembling just slightly. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, she realized. There had always been excuses, small dismissals, moments when her family had made her feel peripheral. She'd just never wanted to see it clearly before. She was the dependable one, the one who worked quietly, the one they didn't think they needed to celebrate. The ache that followed wasn't sharp. It was deep and quiet, spreading slowly through her chest. It wasn't just about last night, it was about years of small cuts. Every forgotten birthday, every unreturned message, every time her success had been met with polite indifference. And she'd kept trying, hoping one day they'd see her not as the independent one who didn't need them, but simply as a daughter and sister who still wanted to belong. She walked into the living room, sunlight pooling on the floorboards, and looked around. The house felt different now. The warmth she'd poured into it seemed to reflect back only her own effort. But instead of breaking her, the silence began to feel, revealing honest dot for the first time. She saw her family not through the lens of love, but through reality, people capable of affection, yes, but selective with their care. She'd been waiting for their approval, but they'd already shown her how little it mattered to them. She took a long breath and whispered into the stillness, "I see it now." Then she straightened up, gathered the framed family photo from the hallway, and quietly placed it inside a drawer. The ache remained, but beneath it, something new stirred, not bitterness, but clarity. The kind that comes when a long illusion finally fades and the truth, however painful, sets you free. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. The kind of silence that didn't just fill the rooms, it seemed to settle inside her, pressing against her ribs until she could hardly breathe. The curtains were still open, and the moonlight spilled across the table she had so carefully set. The plates gleamed faintly, untouched. As if waiting for a dinner that would never come, she sat there for a long while, unable to move. Her phone was still on the counter, face down. She didn't need to look. She knew there would be no apology, no missed calls. Just silence, the same kind that had echoed between her and her family for years, disguised as politeness and distance. Eventually she stood up and began to clean again. It was something to do, something to keep her hands from shaking. She packed the food into containers and labeled them automatically: chicken, potatoes, pie. It was a habit she'd formed from years of living alone, small acts of care for a future version of herself who'd open the fridge and appreciate the effort. Tonight, though, each click of the container lid felt like sealing away another piece of hope. When she finally sat down again, the kitchen clock read past midnight. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window, tired eyes, strength, sadness, and something else beginning to bloom beneath it. Strength. Not the kind that roars, but the kind that refuses to crumble. Though she thought about the little girl she used to be, the one who'd wait by the door for her parents to come home, clutching drawings she'd made, eager for their praise. That same hope had followed her into adulthood, disguised as ambition, as generosity, as patience. For years she'd told herself maybe next time they'd notice, maybe next time they'd care. But there was no next time. Not anymore. Tears came quietly, unannounced. They weren't dramatic, just steady, the kind that comes from a wound that's been waiting too long to heal. She didn't sob or break down. She just let the tears fall until her breathing evened out again. When they stopped, she felt lighter. Emptier, but clearer. That was the moment something shifted. She realized she didn't need to prove anything. Not her success, not her worth, not her love. The house she'd built wasn't meant to be validation for anyone else. It was hers, the result of every sleepless night, every hard-earned paycheck. Every time she'd chosen to believe in herself when no one else did, she stood up and walked through each room slowly, her hand brushing the walls, her fingers trailing along the edges of furniture she had chosen with care. These walls had seen her exhaustion and her joy. They had heard her laughter, her plans, her quiet determination. And now they would witness her letting go. In the living room, she found the gift box she had wrapped for her parents. A small framed picture of the house with a handwritten note that said, "Our home." Finally. She stared at it for a long moment before unwrapping it, tearing the paper carefully, almost ceremoniously. Then she folded the note, slipped it into a drawer, and placed the empty frame on the mantel. When she looked at it again, she didn't see loss. She saw space. Space for something new, something honest. She brewed herself a cup of tea and carried it out to the porch. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. The street was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt different now, not lonely but calm. She took a slow sip, exhaling softly. This wasn't the night she had planned. But maybe, in a way, It was the night she needed, the one that finally taught her that peace sometimes begins when you stop waiting to be chosen. The days that followed were quieter, but different now. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space, like room to breathe. The ache that had weighed on her chest began to soften, replaced by a steady calm that she hadn't realized she'd been craving all along. At first, she still found herself listening for her phone, half expecting a message, an apology, an explanation, but none came. Her family went on as though nothing had happened, sharing updates in the group chat, tagging each other in photos, talking about the baby's nursery. And for the first time, she didn't rush to reply. She read their messages, smiled faintly, and set the phone aside. It didn't hurt the same way anymore. It just didn't matter. Instead, she began to fill her days with her own life, the one she had built quietly while waiting for their love. She repainted the spare room in soft sage green, turning it into a studio for her writing. She planted flowers along the front walk, bright bursts of color that greeted her each morning. She even started hosting small dinners, not for her family, but for friends, neighbors, and coworkers who laughed loudly, brought dessert, and always showed up on time. Her house, once meant to impress, was now a place that simply felt alive. One Sunday afternoon, while she was tending the garden, her phone rang. It was her mother. The sound still made her heart flutter, not with fear or hope this time, but something steadier. She wiped her hands on her jeans and answered. "Hello, sweetheart," her mother said, her tone light, casual. "We were thinking of dropping by next weekend. Your sister's been wanting to see the house." There was a pause, the kind that used to fill her with panic, desperate to please. "But not now," she smiled gently, looking at the rows of blooming marigolds. "That's sweet, Mom," she said softly. "But I'm actually hosting some friends that weekend. Maybe another time." "Oh," her mother said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "Well, of course. We'll figure something out." They exchanged small talk after that, polite, distant, but without tension. When she hung up, she felt no guilt, no lingering need to explain herself. For the first time, she realized she wasn't waiting for her family to understand her anymore. She didn't need them to. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, she carried a cup of tea out to the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, a few children playing in the distance, the hum of crickets beginning. She looked out at the house she had built, every detail touched by her own hands. The curtains swayed softly in the breeze, and the garden glowed with color. This was what she had worked for all those years. Not just a roof and walls, but peace. A place where she could be fully herself without shrinking to fit anyone else's expectations. She took a deep breath, feeling gratitude rise where bitterness once lived. She thought of the girl who had waited the door that night, heart breaking over empty chairs, and she smiled, a little sadly, but proudly too. That girl had stayed, had faced the silence, had learned that love doesn't have to come from where it should. Sometimes you build it yourself, one small choice at a time. The porch light flicked on automatically as dusk settled. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea, her gaze soft but steady. Her house was quiet, yes, but it was hers. And in that stillness, she finally felt what she had been searching for all along, not approval, not applause, just peace.